Welcome to the DataPak Grammar and Punctuation navigation. The first sheet that we're going to look at is the Grammar and Punctuation student profile. So that you can easily identify these grammar and punctuation sheets, they have been coloured this brownish colour here, and that's just so we can see that all of these sheets are the grammar and punctuation sheets. We're going to have a look at the Grammar and Punctuation student profile sheet first. And the main purpose of this sheet is to analyse student data by groups or filters. It's important to note that before we begin, I will be playing with filters while I'm showing you this data. And when I do, the data in the Grammar and Punctuation student profile and then also in the Grammar and Punctuation skill chart over here will change accordingly, and you'll see that data change. So if we're going to read the item responses, we need to have a little bit of an understanding of this information here. And it's not information that you'll look at all the time, but it is important just to know that it's there and that it is available for you to look at if you need to refer to the Australian curriculum or an item in more closely. So if you look across the top here, in this, if I just do one click over, in S1 here, you can see that this just identifies whether it's either a grammar or a punctuation question. So G for grammar, P for punctuation, as simple as that. Then the aspect here is the skill. So for this first one here, it's the skill is modal, and so on. You can see that there are different skills there that the students would have to apply to be able to be successful for that item in the test. The ACARA code is just under that, and then just underneath the ACARA code you'll see the descriptor, and that's the descriptor for each item, and it just tells you a little bit more about what the students had to do. So for this item here, the students had to identify the correct modal adverb in a complex sentence, and so it just gives you that little bit more information. Just underneath that here, you have the correct answer, and then the item ranking, so the national difficulty and the national percent correct, and then the Queensland percent correct. And you can have a look at those right across there. In the orange just here, you can see the number of students who participated in the test is just at the top. Then the number of students who answered this item correctly, and the percentage of students who answered this item correctly. So let's have a look at filtering before we go any further. And filtering allows you to look more closely at the data and target groups of students or parts of the test. So just remember, when I play with these filters, these different charts down here might change. So if I look at this chart before I start playing, and we have a look at it again in a moment, you'll see that it might look slightly different, and that's okay. If I just scroll across here before I go any further, and we'll just have a look at some filters just back here in this information here, which is just information about the student, their background, and then it does go into some scale score and band information over here as well. But if I just want to filter and I just want to, let's have a look at classes, and I just want to look at my class, and my class is this B class here, and I just want to look at the students in my class, I can do that, and I can scroll across, and then you'll see if I go into this student profile chart, the data has significantly changed because I'm now just looking at my class. If I just scroll back across now, and I'm going to take that off because I want to look at everybody. But with classes, it's a good idea if you are a teacher to look at that just for your class. But if you're in a position where you are interested in the data across a range of classes for different reasons, you might look at groups of classes or each class on its own. You can see that you can also filter by sex. I can just have a look at the male or female students. I can have a look at student backgrounds here. I can also have a look and just filter in more closely at the scale score and band. So for the grammar and punctuation, let's look at the achievement band. if I just want to look at students who were in the achievement band 4, 5 and 6, I can do that, but I can also put a sort on there, so I can just look at the students who achieve 4, 5 and 6, but I can look at them in order there as well of their achievement band. And then if I scroll across, I can see that the data here has changed because now I'm only looking at those students, but I can also see, you saw that chart just changed just there. I'm now only looking at those students there as well. Let's just scroll back, and I'm going to, I know that I've got a filter on here because I've got this little funnel, and I can also see that the numbers for the rows over here have turned blue, and I want to take that off. So I'm going to clear that, and I can also clear the sort up there as well. So now that I know, I should be back to that original data that I was looking at before. So let's have a look now at the other variables feature, because this is a feature that is really helpful if you want to look at particular groups of students. It allows you to customise your data, so you can add in for, I could just add in a learning support group of students or an extension group, or if I'm looking at grammar and punctuation, it might be a group of students that I'm focusing in on writing, and grammar and punctuation is a focus for them. So in my class, I just want to look at perhaps 5 or 6 students just to have a look more closely at their data. So to do that, I can double click, I can change the name of that, and I can put learning support here, and I can change this one here to extension, and I could even put in my writing groups as well. And you can put as many of these variables in as you like, and it just means that once those variables are in this data set, you can then sort and filter these variables as well. So I'm just going to add I'm just going to put learning support there, and I'm just going to pretend that these students are learning support students. I'm going to pretend that these students here are extension students. And then each time I go and play with my data, so if I go across here and I'm just looking at this class here, I can see that I'm just looking at the data for that class, but I also can see that I only have one student here in that class that's in an extension group. Or the other way that I can do it is the other way around, and I can filter my variables in here, and my data over in this part will change accordingly as well. So I'm just going to take that off because we're going to, I've got to keep going. I'm just going to clear that filter because we're going to have a look now at the grammar and punctuation student profile chart. So I've just made sure that all of my filters are off. Remember, that's really important because this chart changes each time I've put a filter in. The purpose of this chart is to see at a glance the question responses filtered % alongside national results. So the questions here are down the bottom, and you can see the answer is in brackets. The percentage correct is on the left-hand side of the graph. The school results are filtered in the bars. So for question 26, 99% of students answered that question correctly. But if I'm looking down here and I'm going to pick on this question here, and that's question 35, I can see that only 25% of students at this school answered that item correctly. So that might be an item that I want to have a look at more closely and see what that item was. So if that's item 35, I could go back over to this chart and I could find item 35, here it is. And I just want to have a look now at the students that did not answer that question correctly. So you can see now I'm only looking at the students who didn't get their answer correctly, and my data has changed. So I can see that even though they didn't answer that response, they didn't respond correctly there, they actually responded quite well to some of these other questions, and they're meeting the national results. So that's, something quite good there. Okay, so let's take that filter off again. Here it is. And come back to this chart here. So just as we did then, you can identify questions you might want to know more about. The graph updates every time that I look at that grammar and punctuation student profile, so just be aware of that. But I can have a look at a glance to see the difference in the data in the student profile makes with the filters on. So if I'm putting filters on, I can see in this chart the difference that makes to the data. So let's have a look now at the grammar and punctuation skill analysis. So the grammar and punctuation skill analysis chart helps to analyse the items more closely. So again, the questions that you might have identified in the in the grammar and punctuation student profile chart here, you can also identify in here. So I'm just going to make them up because I can't remember what they were. And then I can have a look in the strand and I can see, well, they're all grammar items. I can have a look at that aspect, which remember is that skill, and then the descriptor, and I can see if there are any commonalities in there. Now, I've just picked these out randomly, so there may not be commonalities, but when you do this, it might be interesting to note if you see something that is appearing multiple times, it then might become something that you would like to focus your teaching on. So if I just clear that, and another thing that I can do in here is then also just look at grammar if I like, and I can just have a look at the grammar questions. These are your students here, so I can see all of my students and see that for grammar these were their responses, whether they got the item correct or incorrect. And I'm just going to take that off. And I can also have a look at the aspect here, and I can just go, well, look, I just want to look at adverbs. So I can just have a look at that question or that skill, and there might be some that have more than one, and that's fine. So yeah, some of them might come up more than once. And then in this descriptor, you can do a similar thing there as well, where you can just have a look for some commonalities. So I might want to look at, for example, let me have a look. What if I type in sentence and see what comes up? It says lots. What if I type in let's try clause and see what comes up. Okay, so there are 4 questions there, or 4 items where clause has come up, and I can have a look across at my data then, and I can see that where students were able to answer questions correctly with a clause in and where they weren't. So I can also then from this chart go across to this grammar and punctuation skill chart, and we'll have a look at this one more closely in a moment, but you saw that chart change very quickly there. Because I'm only looking at 4 items, that's why you've sort of got these 4 points here. So that would be item 1, they answered 2 items correctly, 3 items correctly, and 4 items correctly, because remember over here in my analysis, I'm only looking at 4 questions now. But I can see my student names are across the bottom, and I can see which students are actually answering questions really well with a clause in them, or the aspect of clause. So I'll just go back to the grammar and punctuation skill analysis, and I want to take this filter off so that I've got all the data, and then we can come back here to the grammar and punctuation skill analysis, and you can see across the bottom I have all of the students' names, and if I hover over each student bar, over the bar, is it going to let me? I can see there that for this student, Sammy Alvarado, he achieved 72% of items correctly. So the percentage of items is on the left-hand side here, and then as with other charts, you can see that the filtered average percent is in the grey bars, and the national average is across here in the green bar. So the purpose of this chart then is to have a look at those students more closely, and if you are looking at the grammar and punctuation skill analysis and you're playing with the filters in here, this data will become more meaningful to you as well.